We're going to continue our reading of The Golden Bull by Marjorie Cowley. We're going to pick up with Chapter 7, Goddess of Beer. In the late afternoon, Jomar and the crew left the canal and walked through the camp to reach the reservoir. Zepha, stirring food in a large blackened bowl, raised her hand in greeting when she saw Jomar. "Girl, pay attention to your work," came Malik's low growl. Zepha returned to stirring the pot that rested on the dull embers. When Jomar breathed in the smells of lamb and onion stew, he knew Katnu had spoken the truth. The men would be rewarded with abundant food. As the crew left the camp, Malik settled down in the shade next to another large pot. This one sat on a three-legged stand and had a ladle attached to it with braided flax. Without a word being exchanged between Malik and the slave, Katnu led Jomar and the others to a reservoir a short distance away. Once there, Katnu gave directions in a clear, calm voice as he worked alongside the men. There were fewer muttered complaints. In spite of hunger and fatigue, the men briskly cleared the reservoir of debris. They returned to camp at dusk to line up for food. Zepha and the old man scooped out the stew with chunks of freshly baked flatbread and distributed the meal to those in line. She did not look up at Jomar when he stood in front of her. It was the largest portion of food that Jomar had seen in a long time, and he crammed the delicious meal into his mouth. He could tell by the taste and light color of the bread that it had been made from wheat, not the coarse and flavorless emmer that his family had been forced to eat. Jomar sought out Katnu. "Where did this wheat come from?" "The temple granaries have great stores of food gathered from all the farmlands," Katnu answered. "Our crops have failed." Jomar's voice rose. "Our own storage bins are empty. We go hungry." Katnu hushed him with a finger to his lips. "The farmers do without so that the city of Ur may flourish. The temple takes a portion of food and animals from the farms to feed its officials, workers, and craftsmen," he said quietly. The farmers stopped eating when they saw Zepha and the old man struggle to move the large pot with the attached ladle to the center of the cooking area. Malik, on his feet and swaying, gestured for the men to come and drink. They surged around the brew pot, swilling down gulps of beer and spitting out the barley husks that floated on the surface. Although his throat was scratchy from the dust, Jomar took only one swallow. He must stay alert for whatever lay ahead. Malik pointed to Zepha, who was finishing her meal. "Sing for us, girl." Although his speech was slurred, his tone was one of command. With a startled look, Zepha glanced at her brother. Jomar nodded. "Shall I sing again about the moon god Nana, or a song to the sun god Utu?" she said in a shaky voice. Malik snorted. "Neither. Sing to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer." Zepha's voice shook. "I have no song to her." "Make one up," Malik ordered. Zepha pulled out her lyre. She sat on the ground with her head down and strummed on the instrument for a long, awkward time. An angry voice rang out. "Begin!" "Play!" said another. Jomar wanted to shout at her too. Instead, he tried to imitate the calm, clear voice that Katnu had used at the reservoir. "She'll sing when she's ready." Zepha took a deep breath and began her song hesitantly, almost in a whisper. Slowly her voice gathered force, and the song took on a lilting beat. "Hail to Ninkasi, who fills the mouth with beer, brown barley beer. Hail to Ninkasi, who taught us to make the beer, brown barley beer. Hail to Ninkasi, who knew honey froths the beer, brown barley beer. Hail to Ninkasi, who fills the mouth with beer, brown barley beer." The men listened avidly, and Jomar let out his breath with relief. Where had she learned to make up such a rollicking drinking song? The men shouted to Zepha to sing the song again, and Jomar saw that her face was flushed with pleasure at her success. Milling around the brew pot, the men clapped their hands and joined lustily in the singing. "Again! Again!" they shouted. But when they pushed in around her, Zepha paled, and her words faltered. She held her lyre against her chest like a shield. Alarmed, Jomar looked to the slave for guidance. "A wrestling match!" Katnu shouted above the din. He looked at Jomar and pointed toward Malik, who lay sprawled in a stupor on a sheepskin robe, with his mouth open, his eyes closed. Jomar snatched up Zepha's basket. Shoving his way through the crowd, he pulled her from the center of the group. There were angry howls of protest. Some of the men tried to stop them from leaving by grabbing at their arms, their clothes. Zepha clutched her lyre with both hands. "Who will come forward to fight?" Katnu yelled. "The winner will take home a sack of lentils." The boisterous farmers turned their attention to the match, circling around the two men who had volunteered to wrestle. An area was cleared for the contest. Bets were placed. As the name of one fighter, then the other, was shouted out. Jomar tugged at Zepha's arm, then motioned for her to follow him. Glancing back, he saw the wrestlers rubbing oil on their bodies. "Now, Zepha, now!" Jomar said, breaking into a run. "This is our chance!" Chapter 8. The Moonlit Road. With only a slender new moon to see by, Jomar was unsure which road they were on. He ran hard, his only thought to get away from the camp. Fear made them both light-footed and fleet. Jomar heard thrashing sounds nearby. "We're after you," came a slurred voice out of the shadows. "The slave girl will pay for this, and so will you." It was Malik, and he was not alone. There were more confused, crashing noises as the drunken men tried to hunt them down. Then a heavy thud. Malik spoke no more, but others did. "Now we'll have to lug him back to camp." "It'll take the three of us to do it." "We'll miss the fight." "Glad they escaped. Wish I were with them." More muffled commotion. They heard a faint dragging sound, then silence. Jomar made out a different road ahead and took it, running until his breath gave out. Unable to stop in time, Zepha ran into him. They hung on to each other until their heavy, painful breathing returned to an even rhythm. Jomar searched the area for the road to Ur, but paths were everywhere. He dropped to his knees, running his hands across the dust and dirt to discover by touch what he could not see. Finally, Jomar stood up. "This is the road to the city. It's wide and heavily grooved by cartwheels." As they walked, they heard the faint, faraway shouts of men watching the wrestling match. Soon the night swallowed all sounds except the buzz of insects and the steady slap-slap of their sandals on the moonlit road. Jomar broke the silence. "Your lyre got us into trouble again." Zepha stood still. "You're blaming me? You nodded when Malik ordered me to sing." "Keep walking. I was frightened at what he might do if you refused. But you certainly looked happy when the men begged you to sing over and over again." "What's wrong with being happy when people like my music?" Zepha said. "My favorite pig was more interested in my songs than you ever were." Jomar tried to cut her off. "At least we're safe and on our way to Ur." "Safe? You'll be safe, but Malik," Zepha spat out his name, "has made me a slave." "Worse than a slave, a runaway slave," Jomar said to himself. "Ur is so big that no one will know what Malik has done." Jomar hoped this might be so. "And I'll find some work for you to do." Another easy promise. Zepha shook her head. "In this city, no one will need me to care for newborn pigs or spin sheep's wool into yarn." Again, Jomar changed the subject. "Your song, Zepha. How did you come to know the rhythm of a drinking song?" "Last year I heard farmers and herdsmen singing when they gathered near our house to drink beer and sleep in the fields," Zepha said. "Father went with them to the city the next morning to bring the grain and livestock that the temple demanded." Jomar kicked at a few stray dirt clods. "Our barley could have been made into the very beer that Malik was guzzling." "It doesn't matter where the barley came from," Zepha said. "We couldn't have escaped if he hadn't gotten drunk." Jomar sighed. "But it was the slave who thought of the wrestling match so we could get away." Zepha's voice grew soft. "I hope someday the gods will reward him for his kindness to us." Jomar thought about the fresh wounds that would appear on the slave's back if Malik suspected he had helped them escape. Yes, Katnu is kind and brave. The cool of the night helped them walk at a fast pace. They shared Zepha's almonds and raisins between them, eating slowly to make them last longer. Zepha stopped again and shivered. Everything looked so strange and scary. Jomar gazed around him. The land, white with evaporated salt caused by the drought, was bathed by eerie moonlight that made it look even whiter. "It does look strange, but we have to keep walking." They trudged on until Zepha held up a hand. "Listen, a baby's crying." Around a bend, 3 men and 2 women sat huddled for warmth around a small fire by the side of the road. One woman held a wriggling, wailing baby in her arms. "I can't quiet that baby," Jomar whispered. "Don't stop." Zephyr ignored him and walked toward the people crouched around the low flames. Jomar caught up with her and pulled at her sleeve. "We've had enough trouble for one day. I don't want to spend much time here." Straining to be heard over the baby's cries, Jomar spoke to the oldest man. "My sister and I need food to complete our journey to the city. Do you have some you can spare?" "We were turned back at the gate, so we must save what's left of our food for the journey home," the man answered. "Be warned, unless you can show that you have business or employment in you'll be denied entrance." Jomar glanced nervously at Zephyr. How would he get her into the city? He pointed behind him. "We've just escaped from a work crew. You must stay away from a temple official called Malik, who will force you to help clear the waterways." The man nodded his thanks. The mother stood, holding her baby over her shoulder. She paced in a wide circle around the fire, yet still the baby wailed. "My boy cries for milk, but his mother has little to give him," the man said. "We have only one she-goat left on our farm. When we get home, I hope her milk can nourish my son." Zephyr took out her lyre and began strumming a shower of notes, then leaned close to the baby. "Don't weep, black-eyed baby boy, don't weep. Sleep soft, black-eyed baby boy, sleep deep." She sang the lullaby first in a strong voice, then softly, and finally the words disappeared into a soothing hum. The baby's wails were now interspersed by silence, as if he listened between sobs. Suddenly he stopped crying, put his head in the crook of his mother's neck, and fell asleep. Zephyr's rhythmic strumming continued for a few more moments, then her hands were still. "Thank the gods he's sleeping," his mother whispered. The baby's father looked at Zephyr. "It's you we thank, girl." He spread a small square of cloth on the ground. Quickly and quietly, each person brought out a small amount of food and placed it on the cloth. The father tied the corners together and thrust it into Jomar's hands. "This exchange was fair and good," he said. "You will see the gates of the city before noon tomorrow. May you find what you seek in And that's where we'll leave off for today.